The motion sensors in that building were overly sensitive. That's what the day staff kept complaining about. They triggered for everything: cleaning carts, loose paper, even strong air drafts when the loading dock opened too fast. I heard the same joke 3 different times during my first week. Don't breathe too hard in the east hallway or you'll set it off. At first, I believed them, because during the day, the system lit up constantly. But after about 10 nights on shift, I noticed something that didn't fit the pattern. The sensors never triggered when I walked past them. I worked overnight security in a mid-sized office building just outside the industrial district. Nothing fancy. 3 floors, long carpeted corridors, badge access on every major door. At night, the place emptied out completely. No cleaning crew, no late staff. Just me, the camera system, and a grid of motion sensors tied into the alarm panel behind the security desk. The system was old but reliable. Every triggered sensor showed up instantly on the panel with a soft chime and a blinking zone number. During the day shift logs, the activity reports were full of noise, constant minor triggers that the staff had learned to ignore. At night, though, the building was supposed to be perfectly quiet. And for the first week, it was. The first time I noticed the problem, I assumed it was a delay. I was doing my usual 11:30 p.m. round, moving down the east hallway where the sensors were mounted every 20 feet along the ceiling. Small gray domes, easy to miss unless you were looking for them. I passed the first one. Nothing. Passed the second. Nothing. By the third, I slowed down, not because I was suspicious, just because something in the back of my mind was waiting for the familiar soft chime from the panel in the security office. It never came. When I got back to the desk and checked the system log, the hallway showed no movement at all. I told myself the timing window was off. Or maybe the sensitivity dropped at night. Reasonable explanations. For about 3 days, I left it alone. By the end of the second week, the pattern was too clean to ignore. Every night during my rounds, no triggers, no chimes, no recorded motion in the zones I physically walked through. But the strange part wasn't the silence. It was that the sensors still worked perfectly for everything else. One night, around 1:10 a.m., a loose plastic sign near the lobby entrance shifted when the HVAC kicked on. The panel lit up immediately. Zone 03, motion clean, instant, accurate. The system wasn't broken, it was just selective. And the only thing it seemed to ignore was me. I ran a simple test the following night. Instead of walking my normal pace, I moved slowly down the west corridor and stopped directly under one of the sensors. I stood there long enough that it should have triggered at least once. 10 seconds. Nothing. 20. Still nothing. 30. Silence. I raised my hand and waved it slowly in front of the dome. No response. But when I stepped back and tossed my pen lightly into the hallway, the panel chimed instantly. Zone 12. Motion. I remember staring at the blinking light longer than I should have, because by then, the explanation I didn't want was starting to feel more likely than the ones that made sense. After that, I became very aware of how I moved through the building. Night work already makes you quiet by habit, but this was different. I started noticing how naturally my pace matched the rhythm of the empty halls, how my footsteps rarely echoed sharply, how often I paused in exactly the same places during rounds without consciously deciding to. I checked old footage of myself walking the corridors. What I saw bothered me more than the sensors. I moved efficiently. No wasted motion, no sudden stops, no unpredictable shifts in pace. It looked less like a bored guard doing rounds and more like someone following a path that had already been mapped out. The realization came during a completely ordinary shift. Around 2:05 a.m., I was halfway down the central corridor when I slowed to check my watch. Not stopped, just slowed. Behind me, the panel chimed. Soft, quick, Zone 07, motion. I turned slowly. The hallway was empty. The sensor had triggered 2 seconds after I moved past it. Not while I was there, after. Like the system was confirming the space once I was no longer occupying it. That was the moment the thought finally settled in, cold and quiet. The sensors weren't missing me. They were waiting for me to clear the area. After that, the building felt different. Not hostile, not threatening, just coordinated. My rounds continued. My logs stayed clean. The system never once flagged my presence directly, but every now and then, a sensor behind me would blink on a half second too late, like something was quietly updating the map of the building once I moved through it. I stopped testing it because by then, I understood something I wasn't sure I was meant to notice. The building didn't need to detect me. It only needed to know where I had already been. During my final week on the job, they hired a new guard to train on nights. You could hear him coming from halfway down the hall, heavy steps, uneven pacing, constant small adjustments like he wasn't used to the quiet yet. The first time he walked the east corridor alone, the panel lit up like it did during the day. Zone after zone, clean, immediate, exactly what the system was designed to do. I didn't tell him what I'd noticed. I just watched the panel and kept my log the way I always had. Everything normal, everything secure. I don't work nights anymore, but sometimes late at night, when I walk through automatic doors or pass under motion lights in empty places, there's a brief delay before they respond. Just a second, just long enough to make me wonder. And every time it happens, I get the same quiet thought I had during those last weeks in the building. Maybe the system isn't failing to see me. Maybe it's just waiting for me to move on. Every night before my shift ended, I reviewed the automated movement log. It was routine, boring, completely predictable, until the night the system recorded me entering a hallway 20 minutes before I actually walked there. At first, I assumed it was a timestamp error. Old building, old software, nothing surprising, but the camera footage didn't agree because when I finally checked that hallway, the system had already marked me as having left it. The building I worked in wasn't particularly large, but it was heavily monitored. 3 floors, multiple access points, and a central security system that tracked motion sensors, badge entries, and internal movement patterns. Management liked data. Everything was logged. Doors, elevators, motion zones. Even the nightly maintenance cycles had their own timestamp trails. My job was simple: monitor the feeds, do rounds, and verify that the system's version of the night matched reality. Most of the time, it did, perfectly, which is why the first discrepancy bothered me more than it should have, because systems don't usually get things almost right. They're either wrong, or they're precise. I noticed it at the end of a quiet shift. 1:58 a.m. I was doing my routine log review, half-focused, already thinking about coffee and the drive home. The movement summary for the night was mostly empty, just a few expected entries from my rounds. Then I saw it. Zone 2B, corridor movement timestamp 1:12 a.m. I frowned because at 1:12 I had been in the lobby. I knew that the same way you know your own front door is locked. Still, I rewound the camera feed. At 1:12 a.m., the corridor camera showed movement. Not clear, not detailed, just enough motion blurred to confirm someone had passed through the frame. And according to the system, that someone was me. The first thing I checked was badge access. Clean. No door vents near that hallway. Next, I checked the camera angles leading into corridor 2B. Nothing unusual, no one entering, no one leaving, just that single logged movement and the brief blur on the hallway camera. If this had been my first week, I would have written it off. But by then, I knew the building's nightly rhythm too well. The system didn't usually invent activity. It confirmed it, quietly, accurately, which meant either the software had glitched in a very specific way, or something about my movements wasn't lining up with the system's expectations anymore. Over the next few nights, I started checking the logs more carefully, not obsessively, just attentively. And slowly, the pattern began to form. The extra entries didn't happen every night, but when they did, they followed the same structure. Movement recorded in a corridor, camera blur to match. Timestamp always slightly ahead of where I actually was in my rounds. Never behind, always ahead. Like the system wasn't misreading me. It was anticipating me. I needed to know if it was coincidence. So one night, I broke my routine on purpose. Instead of following my usual path, I skipped corridor 2B entirely and stayed in the west wing longer than normal. Then I waited. At 1:07 a.m., I checked the live log, and there it was. Zone 2 arrow. Corridor movement 5 minutes before I had any reason to be near that part of the building. My stomach tightened slowly, the way it does when your body understands something before your thoughts catch up, because the system hadn't just been wrong, it had been confident. I rewound the footage again. Same result, same soft blur in the hallway, same indistinct movement that could pass for a person if you didn't stare too long. But this time, I noticed something else. The blur moved at exactly my walking pace, not fast, not slow, precise, measured, familiar. I watched it 3 more times before the uncomfortable thought finally surfaced. The system wasn't logging someone else. It was logging the version of me it expected to see. After that night, the discrepancies became smoother, harder to isolate. Sometimes the log matched me perfectly, sometimes it was ahead by a few minutes, but the building itself felt more stable when I followed my usual route, quieter, balanced. The one night I deliberately changed my pace, stopping longer than usual in the stairwell. The system registered 3 separate movement corrections across the floor within 10 minutes. Not alarms, not errors, adjustments. Like something was quietly resynchronizing the map of the building around me. During my final week, they assigned a new guard to shadow my shift. He was louder than I expected, uneven pacing, random stops, too human. The first night, he walked the corridors alone. The movement log looked completely normal, messy, imperfect, exactly what you'd expect from a real person moving through space. No early entries, no anticipations, no corrections. I didn't tell him what I'd been seeing. I just watched the system carefully, because by then I understood something that made the back of my neck feel cold. The building didn't predict everyone, just the ones who stayed long enough to become predictable. I don't work in monitored buildings anymore, but sometimes, late at night, I still catch it. Automatic doors that slide open just a second too early, motion lights that flick on before I fully enter the room, systems that seem ready for me. It's probably coincidence, old habits, pattern fatigue from too many night shifts. That's what I tell myself. But every now and then, when something responds just a little too quickly to where I'm about to be, I remember those logs. And I wonder if the building was ever wrong at all, or if it just learned my routine before I did. The first time the system flagged me, nothing was actually wrong. No alarms going off, no forced doors, no unexpected movement anywhere in the building. Just a quiet notification buried near the bottom of the nightly report, the kind of line most guards would scroll past without thinking twice. Behavioral deviation. Subject: night security. I remember reading it once, then again, then a third time, slower. Because at first, it didn't even register as something important. The software in that building generated dozens of minor notes every night. Temperature fluctuations, routine system checks, harmless sensor confirmations. This one looked administrative, routine, harmless, except for one detail I couldn't immediately explain, because when I replayed my shift in my head, the only thing I had done differently that night was stop walking for about 30 seconds longer than usual. That was it. No alarms, no incidents, no reason for the building to care. And yet, apparently, it had noticed. What bothered me wasn't the warning itself. Buildings generate noise in their systems all the time. Minor discrepancies, harmless notes that never lead to anything real. What bothered me was how calm the message looked. No urgency. No error code, just quiet certainty, like whatever process had flagged me hadn't hesitated. I sat there a little longer than I meant to, watching the report screen idle. The office around me was completely still. The soft hum of the server rack behind the wall, the low ventilation cycling through the ceiling. Normal night sounds, familiar, comforting even. And yet, for the first time since I'd started that job, I had the uncomfortable sense that something in the building had just paid closer attention to me than it was supposed to. By that point, I had been working overnight security for just under 4 months. Long enough that the building had stopped feeling unfamiliar. Long enough that my body moved through the corridors without needing conscious thought. Night work does something strange to your sense of time. At first, every hour feels stretched and heavy. Every sound stands out. Every empty hallway feels temporary, like someone might appear at any moment. But after enough weeks, the quiet stops feeling empty. It starts feeling organized, structured, predictable in a way that almost becomes comfortable. My shift always started the same way. Badge in, panel check, camera sweep. Then the first round at exactly 11:30 p.m. Same route, same pacing, same sequence of turns through the 3 floors of the building. Management liked consistency. They were very clear about that during onboarding. Consistent patrol routes meant fewer blind spots, better coverage metrics, cleaner reports. What they didn't spend much time explaining was how closely the updated system tracked those patterns. It didn't just log where you went, it logged how you moved while you were there. Timing between checkpoints, average walking speed, duration spent in each zone. They called it efficiency analytics. There's something people don't tell you about overnight security. It isn't the boredom that changes you, it's the repetition. Night after night, walking the same corridors at the same pace, your body starts smoothing out the rough edges of how you move. Your footsteps get quieter, your turns get tighter, your pauses start happening in the same places without you deciding to. Efficiency creeps in slowly, quietly. By the time you notice it, it already feels normal. Looking back now, I think that was the part the system was really measuring. Not just where I went, but how refined my routine had become. The alert appeared near the bottom of the log. Easy to miss, almost polite in how quietly it presented itself. 2:14 a.m. Behavioral variance detected. I leaned forward slightly in my chair. Not alarmed, just curious, because I knew exactly what had happened at 2:14. I had paused in the west stairwell. I could picture it clearly, one hand resting lightly on the rail, the soft hum of ventilation echoing through the concrete shaft. The air cool and still. Nothing had triggered the stop. No noise, no movement. Just one of those moments that happens on long overnight shifts when the silence around you feels thick enough that your body slows down without asking permission. I had checked my watch, counted maybe 40 seconds, then continued my round exactly like always. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual, except the system had marked it. I pulled up the historical data from the previous week, not because I was worried, just curious. The system let you overlay movement timing across multiple shifts, a feature management loved during performance reviews. When I layered my last 10 patrols on the screen, the lines almost perfectly overlapped. Same corridor durations, same stairwell timing, same loop completion window within a margin of a few seconds. Too clean. Cleaner than I remembered it feeling while I was actually walking those rounds. I leaned back slowly in my chair, because for the first time, it occurred to me that the building knew my routine in a way I had never consciously mapped myself. The next night, I made a quiet decision. Keep everything tight. No extra pauses, no drifting pace, no unnecessary stops anywhere along the route. If the system wanted consistency, I'd give it consistency. So, I moved carefully, deliberately, matching the rhythm my body had already learned over the past 4 months. When the shift ended, I opened the report immediately. Clean. No variants, no flags. For a few seconds, I just sat there looking at the screen, waiting for the relief to come. It didn't, because now the first alert didn't feel random anymore. Now it felt specific, like the system hadn't been guessing. It had been measuring, and worse, it had been right. 3 nights later, the notification came back. Behavioral drift. Minor before I even checked the timestamps. I already knew what I had done. On my 1:30 round, I had moved through the central corridor slightly faster than usual. Maybe 5 seconds difference. 6 at most. The kind no human supervisor would ever notice. But the system had. And that was the moment the thought surfaced. Quiet and unwelcome. The building wasn't just watching where I went. It was watching how closely I matched the version of me it expected to see. I told myself I was overthinking it, so I ran a test. Deliberately. The following night, during my second round, I stopped in the east hallway and stood completely still. 10 seconds, 20, 40, a full minute. The building stayed perfectly quiet until I checked the report. Behavioral anomaly. Review recommended by then. The pattern was no longer subtle. The system wasn't reacting to danger, it was reacting to deviation. After that week, something changed. Doors hesitated when I approached too slowly. Motion lights flickered if I paused too long. Elevators lagged, but only on nights when my report showed variance. Like the building wasn't just observing anymore, like it was compensating. 3:07 a.m. for no reason. I turned around early during my patrol, 3 steps back. The panel chimed. Pattern instability. Subject out of route. For the first time in 4 months, my hands felt cold. The new guy moved unevenly, normally human. His reports were messy. The system never flagged him, not once. That's when I understood. The system didn't correct everyone, only the ones who had been consistent long enough to become part of the pattern. I don't work overnight security anymore, but sometimes late at night, automatic doors hesitate when I slow down. Motion lights flicker when I stop too long. And every now and then, when I change direction suddenly in an empty hallway, and something electronic nearby pauses, just for a fraction of a second too long. I still get the quiet feeling that somewhere something is still trying to decide whether I'm behaving the way I'm supposed to.